Hello, my name is Nova, and my sister tied an anchor to my leg and pushed me into the sea, just so she could take everything our father left behind. They planned it together, called it a family trip, laughed over champagne while I sank, and when they got home, they held a funeral, toasted to my death, and erased my face from every photo like I never existed. But what if I told you I didn't drown? What if I told you I watched them celebrate before I walked back into the room they thought I'd buried me from? Would you still call it a family? The evening air in Coral Gables always smelled like cut grass and quiet tension. That night, it clung heavier than usual as I stepped out of my car, heels clicking softly against the long driveway lined with lanterns and lemon trees. The house hadn't changed. Spanish-style arches, the same ivy creeping up the columns, like the place was too proud to age. I adjusted the neckline of my dress and took a breath before pushing through the double doors. Inside, the laughter had already started, the kind that belonged to people who'd never been forced to work for anything. Glasses clinked. Music from an old jazz playlist trickled through ceiling speakers. Everyone had taken their seats around the polished mahogany table that stretched almost the length of the room. Almost everyone. Mine was still empty. The only one at the farthest end, shoved up against the window, where the air conditioning never reached. The backrest was cracked. When I pulled it out, it wobbled. I sat anyway. I always sat anyway. "Hey, could you bring out some more wine for this side?" Someone called down the table, waving in my direction. It was Ricky, Isolde's latest fiancé, or maybe just her date. I didn't correct him. I didn't answer. He'd mistaken me for the help, and Isolde didn't say a word. She just gave that kind of smirk that only sisters can perfect, part condescension, part victory lap. I didn't meet her eyes. Instead, I looked down at the gold-rimmed plate in front of me, sitting on a charger I'd picked out 5 years ago for our parents' anniversary. That was the problem with building everything for a family that didn't value you. Eventually, you'd decorate the space they erased you from. I shifted in the chair. The leg wobbled again. "Nova," Vera said from mid-table, her voice loud enough to slice through the clatter. "You're unusually quiet tonight." I smiled thinly, just taking it all in. Truthfully, I hadn't expected to be invited at all. Not since Dad passed. Not since Isolde had somehow taken control of everything. The family business, the house, the attention. Tonight was labeled a heritage dinner, whatever that meant. Maybe it was just another excuse to gather and drink and remind me I was expendable. When dessert was cleared and the wine flowed heavier, Vera stood up, her voice suddenly poised and deliberate. "Before we end the night," she began, glancing toward Isolde, "I wanted to address something important regarding the estate." A hush settled. Knives clinked against plates. I straightened in my seat. Isolde, wearing her usual black-on-black power dress, rose just enough to pull out a folder from her clutch. "This won't take long," she said, unfolding the document. "Just a matter of clarity for everyone here." I watched her hands, manicured, sharp, as she slid a copy across the table toward me. It was a legal document. My name was there. Then crossed out. I blinked. My throat tightened. "This shows Nova signed away her claim years ago," Isolde said, matter of fact. "So for any future discussions about the company or the estate, this just clears the air. I didn't remember signing anything like that." "Are you serious?" I managed to say, my voice lower than I intended. "You signed it in 2018, Vera added quickly, eyes already moving on to the next topic. "It's done." "No," I said, louder. "I didn't. I've never—" "Please," Vera cut in, her smile tired and practiced. "Let's not ruin the evening with dramatics." My hand clenched the tablecloth. I stared at the signature. It was almost mine. Not quite. Off by the slope of the R, the tail of the A. But they'd gone through the effort of forging it and making it believable. Everyone else at the table turned back to their wine. A few looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke. Louis was there, seated at the far edge, invited under the pretense of being a longtime family friend and business contact. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw what I needed. Doubt. Alarm. He didn't believe them either. But he didn't speak either. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to say, I built half the properties with you. I was there when Dad wanted to pull out of Miami. I redesigned the flagship tower downtown. I pulled this family out of financial ruin when Isolde was on a yacht in Croatia. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I picked up my glass, smiled, sipped. I thought about the nights I'd fallen asleep at my desk, the time I took out a personal loan to cover payroll, how I'd quietly canceled a vacation to Hawaii when the books came up short one year. All those moments, invisible now. All that remained was a broken chair and a forged signature. Isolde leaned toward Vera and whispered something. They laughed. I swallowed hard. Was this what family had come to? A dinner where I was seated near the window like an afterthought, with a name removed from a paper so carefully it felt like a eulogy. I looked down the table, at the gleaming wine glasses, the heirloom silverware, the centerpiece I'd designed 3 years ago. And then I looked at them. They were laughing. My voice, my blood, my years, they meant nothing. But I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me break. Not tonight. That's the thing about shadows. You don't notice them until the light changes. And I was done standing in theirs. I never went back to my room that night. Not right away. After the dinner, after they humiliated me, I walked up the staircase as if I were just another tired guest, smiling, nodding, waving at someone who barely looked my way. But instead of retreating behind the door, I was given, no longer the one I used to call mine. I kept walking. My heels clicked softly against the floor, each step quieter than the one before. The house, now dimmed and hushed, looked different in the dark. As I moved through the halls, I passed the same family portraits that used to make me feel proud. But that night, they seemed to glare. They favored Isolde, always did, her face centered, framed perfectly. Mine, either cropped, pushed to the side, or missing altogether. It was subtle, but that's how erasure works. Not all at once, bit by bit. The hallway near the study was half lit by a lamp Vera always insisted on keeping turned on. To give the house warmth, she used to say. I paused there for a second, just enough to listen. And that's when I heard it. 2 voices, low, clipped, unmistakably sharp, filtering through the cracked study door. I've already swapped it, Isolde said. Her voice had that smug undertone she never really hid, the one she wore like perfume. The original's back in his chest. Once the fake goes through, she's finished. There was a pause. Then Vera spoke, her tone tighter, but no less cruel. Are you sure she won't remember signing anything? She won't, because she never did. That's the beauty of it. My fingers curled into fists at my side. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Through the gap, I could see them. Isolde in her silk robe, lounging like she owned the place. Vera stood near the desk, holding the manila envelope I had spotted once before, the one she'd told me contained old family documents. It wasn't just forged signatures anymore. It was premeditated. Planned. Cold. I knew that lawyer too. Younger guy, always hovering around Isolde at events. She had him in her pocket. He wasn't just stamping papers, he was rewriting my history and getting paid for it. I wanted to walk in and throw the door open. Ask how they could do this. Ask if this was what Dad would have wanted. Ask if it made them feel powerful to erase their own blood. But I didn't. Not because I was weak. Because I knew it wasn't time. Because silence. Silence lets the enemy speak more than they realize. I took a slow step back from the door, my breath tight in my chest. As I turned to leave, I bumped into someone. Whoa, Lewis said, startled. I pressed a finger to my lips. He froze. His eyes searched mine, and I knew he could see it. The flush in my cheeks, the tremble I was trying to hide. You look like you've seen a ghost, he whispered. I shook my head. Worse. I've seen the living. His expression shifted. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Lewis was one of the few people in that house who had ever seen me show up at 5 a.m. with plans rolled under my arm, working on remodels no one else cared about. He had been there when I quietly paid staff out of pocket to avoid layoffs. He knew. And he just nodded and stepped aside, I didn't go straight to bed, not yet. I needed space. I walked outside, barefoot, the stone cold against my skin. The night had settled heavy over the estate, still, quiet, deceptive, a place where secrets could breathe. I sat near the koi pond, watching the water ripple under the moonlight. My father's old garden, the one he used to tend with me on weekends, now overgrown, neglected, like everything else that wasn't shiny enough for Isolde's taste. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened my voice memos app, and recorded a single line. They've replaced the will. They forged my name. I have no paper, no power, but I have memory. Then I walked back inside, up the stairs, past the portraits, back into the room they gave me. I shut the door gently behind me, locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like an hour, staring at nothing. My legs still buzzed from the tension, but my mind was razor sharp. The worst part of betrayal isn't the lie. It's the moment you realize how many people knew the truth and stayed quiet. I glanced at the nightstand. There, in an old silver frame, was the last photo I had of me and Dad before his health turned. I picked it up. He was smiling, hand on my shoulder. Not Isolde's, mine. He used to call me the builder, not for the job, but for what I did when everything around us broke. I built bridges. I built peace. I built things no one else wanted to fix, and they wanted to write me out of everything he left behind. I touched the frame, whispering the words I hadn't said out loud until then. If they want me gone, they're going to have to bury me for real. That night, I didn't cry. I planned. I never thought death would come so soon, and it came with a smile. The kind of smile I used to believe meant comfort, the kind sisters give in stories right before pulling you in for a hug. But on that boat, under the moon, Isolde's smile was sharp. Not comforting, confirming. We had set out earlier that afternoon. It was Isolde's idea, of course. A little family celebration, she'd said, as if our dinner 2 nights ago hadn't already been her victory parade. The plan was to sail out into the waters off the Keys, toast to Dad's memory, and according to her, symbolically let go of the past. She'd even made it sound like it was for me. Nova's been under a lot of pressure lately, she told the rest of them at brunch as I walked into the kitchen just in time to hear it. Maybe a little salt air will help her see things more clearly. I should have known. The way she phrased things was always layered. We boarded the yacht around 4, the usual crew in place, same boat we used for corporate weekends and donor parties. Everything about it was polished, prepped, and performative. The sun had already dipped behind some light clouds, casting everything in that soft, cinematic light Florida evenings always managed to conjure. I stayed near the railing the entire trip, my back to them, nursing a glass of Pinot that didn't taste like anything. Maybe I was hoping to find a moment of peace. Maybe I wanted the breeze to scrub away the tension I hadn't been able to shake since discovering what they'd done. But the wind only made me colder. Maybe I was a fool to believe I ever belonged, I whispered. The water below shimmered like glass. Somewhere behind me, laughter bounced off the deck's teak floorboards. Vera's voice rose above the others, retelling some tired story that painted her as the victim of yet another misinterpreted comment. I stood still, trying to feel invisible again, just long enough to think. Then I heard soft footsteps. Nova. I turned slowly. Isolde stood barefoot, her dress fluttering slightly from the breeze. She held a half-empty glass of rosé and smiled, like this was just another vacation moment, like we were girls again, 10 and 12, stealing candy from Grandma's pantry and swearing not to tell. You okay? She asked. I nodded slowly. Just needed air. She stepped beside me and pulled the shawl off her shoulders, draping it across mine without waiting for a yes. I didn't move. I couldn't. It's a nice night, she said, looking out at the water. Dad always loved being out here. I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice not to shake. She took a sip from her glass. You always take things too seriously. You know that? I finally turned to her, searching for the real meaning behind her tone. Is that what you think? She shrugged. You hold on too tight. Sometimes it's better to just let go. Her words hung in the air like mist. I looked at her hand, the one resting so casually on the railing. Perfect manicure, no tremble, no hint of hesitation. I know what you did, I said, barely above a whisper. For a second, her expression faltered, but only for a second. Did what? She asked, her voice like silk soaked in ice. I shook my head. You don't have to pretend. She set her glass down on the side table, then knelt down slightly, pretending to fuss with the hem of my dress near my ankle. I felt it before I saw it. The thick, deliberate tug around my leg. Something cold, something heavy. What are you? I started, stepping back. But it was too late. She looked up at me. Her smile widened. You've always been the weight dragging us down, she whispered. Let me set you free. I gasped, and then she pushed. The railing hit my lower back, knocking the breath out of me. The sea didn't feel like water. It felt like impact, hard, crushing, cold. Then it went dark. I didn't scream. There wasn't time, just a rush of bubbles and the sensation of being dragged. The anchor. She'd tied an anchor to me. I kicked instinctively, but the rope around my ankle held fast. My body twisted as I sank, the weight pulling me down, deeper, faster than I could resist. Salt stung my eyes. My mouth opened before I could stop it. Water surged in. Panic turned into a blur of images. Her face above me, the moonlit deck, the broken chair from dinner, my father's photo, the documents, the forged signature. Everything I built, every moment I swallowed my pride. Gone. My lungs begged for air, but all I could do was claw at the rope. I tried to remember how many knots she'd tied, if I could reach it, if I could even see straight. But my body wasn't listening anymore. My thoughts slowed. Everything sounded far away, muted, like underwater radio static. Is this how it ends? Erased without a scream. I stopped kicking, and that's when it hit me. This couldn't be it. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about refusal. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Not like this. In the silence, somewhere between drowning and surrender, I saw his face. My father, his hand on my shoulder, his voice like a steady drumbeat in my chest. You are the one who builds, don't let them tear you down. I clenched my fists. Something in me, something deep, something primal, snapped into focus. I wasn't ready to die. I wouldn't let them erase me, not now, not ever. And so, I fought. When I clawed my way back to the surface, gasping salt and rage, I knew survival was no accident. It was defiance. I broke through the water with a soundless scream, arms flailing against the weight pulling me down. The anchor still tugged at my ankle, but I'd managed to loosen the knot just enough for my foot to slide free. It had taken every last ounce of air, every memory of my father's voice urging me to fight, every shred of the woman I used to be. My lungs screamed as I pulled myself onto a plank floating nearby, likely part of a supply crate that had slipped from the yacht's deck. The stars above were quiet, watching. I lay there, half dead, half born again, the salt water burning my throat, my vision blurred. I couldn't tell how long I floated, minutes, maybe more. My limbs ached. The pain was deep and dull, the kind that settled into your bones and waited. But I was alive. The current had carried me far enough from the yacht to leave it behind, but not so far that the shoreline was unreachable. I scanned the horizon, still struggling to keep my head up, the wooden plank barely supporting my weight. Somewhere in the distance, a soft glow shimmered across the water. It wasn't the moon. It was a boat. A small one, moving slowly. I tried to wave but nearly slipped off the board, so I shouted, or tried to. It came out more like a hoarse rasp than anything resembling speech. Then the light shifted, angled toward me. A voice, deep, unfamiliar, called out in Spanish. ¿Quién está ahí? I tried again, louder this time. Here, please. Another moment passed. The boat turned. I heard the engine hum slightly louder as it approached. A flashlight swept across the water, then stilled. Dios mío, the man gasped. Hold on. I didn't have to hold on for long. The man, broad-shouldered, middle-aged, with sea-worn hands, grabbed me under the arms, and pulled me onto his boat like I weighed nothing at all. I collapsed onto the deck, coughing water, limbs trembling, chest heaving. He dropped a thick wool blanket over my shoulders and pressed a warm thermos into my hands. "Drink," he said softly. His accent was Cuban, the kind I'd grown up around. Comforting, unpretentious. I took a sip. It was coffee, strong, sweet, laced with something that steadied my shaking. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't ask what I was doing floating in the middle of the ocean in a dress. He just let me breathe. The boat kept moving at a steady pace toward the mainland, the lights of Miami beginning to sharpen in the distance. I leaned against the side rail, trying to piece together what had just happened, what it meant, and more terrifying, what came next. "Why'd you save me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at me, then turned back toward the water. "Because you're not done yet," he said. "People like you, who don't drown, they still got work to do." His words landed somewhere deep in my chest. "Name's Hector," he added after a pause. "Fish, mostly. Grouper, some snapper, sometimes people." I managed a weak smile. He didn't press for details. That's the thing about men like Hector. Life teaches them that some stories need time to be told, and some don't need telling at all. We docked just before dawn at a small marina tucked behind a line of shuttered bait shops and boat repair shacks. Hector offered to call someone, but I shook my head. "I've got it from here." He nodded. "You sure?" I was more sure than I'd ever been. I walked barefoot along the dock, blankets still draped around my shoulders. The city was just waking, garbage trucks rumbling, coffee shops opening their doors. Nobody looked twice at me. That was the beauty of Miami. It could be brutally honest and completely indifferent all at once. I made my way to Little Havana, back to a place I hadn't stepped foot in for nearly a decade. Lewis's Cafe stood at the corner, just as I remembered. Faded paint, the same cracked tile out front, smelled like fresh bread and strong espresso. I knocked twice on the side door. No one answered. I knocked again, harder. A moment later, the door creaked open. Lewis stared at me like he was looking at a ghost. "Nova?" His voice caught. "I need a place," I said, "just for a little while." He didn't ask. He stepped aside. The room upstairs hadn't changed. Small twin bed, old ceiling fan, a sink in the corner. No frills, just quiet, just safe. I sat on the edge of the bed, blankets still tight around me. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was calm, too calm maybe. The kind of calm that comes after you've been swallowed by something and spit back out. That calm is dangerous. It doesn't scream. It watches. It waits. I opened my phone, miraculously still functional, and deleted every text I'd ever sent to Isolde. Then I pulled out a notebook from the drawer beside the bed and started writing. Not thoughts, steps. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. They tried to erase me. Now I'd erase their certainty. One move at a time. I still had the name. I still had the knowledge. And thanks to Hector, I still had breath. I didn't know when they'd find out I was alive. I didn't care, because when they did, it would already be too late. I watched from the darkened window as they laughed at my death and toasted to their victory. The old sycamore outside the dining room still stood tall, its branches brushing against the glass, swaying slightly with the coastal breeze. I had crouched beneath it dozens of times as a kid, hiding from chores, from Vera's lectures, from Isolde's smug corrections. Now it gave me cover as I peered through the sheer drapes and into the home that once had my fingerprints on every wall. Inside, they were dressed in black, mourning colors, but the atmosphere was anything but somber. A jazz trio played in the corner. Champagne flowed like it was New Year's Eve. The caterers we used for weddings and launch events were handing out seared scallops and mini beef Wellingtons. A long buffet table was lined with gold-rimmed platters. In the center stood a single-framed photo. Me. The one from my college graduation. The only version of me they still liked. Before I became a threat. I expected mourning, I whispered to myself. Instead, I found celebration. This wasn't grief. This was relief. They were glad I was gone. Isolde, in a fitted black dress that looked more like a cocktail number than funeral attire, raised her glass. "To freedom," she said, her voice clear and confident, "and to the empire we now control." Applause broke out. Real applause. Vera, ever the strategist, leaned over to whisper something into the ear of a man I didn't recognize. She was smiling, calm, like she'd just sealed a deal at a charity gala. "Poor Nova," she said, just loud enough for a few to hear. "But this is for the best." I gripped the window frame tighter. My hands were shaking again, not from fear, but from restraint. I scanned the crowd, board members, extended cousins, employees who'd once sent me holiday cards. Even Lewis's cousin was there, though Lewis himself was nowhere in sight. He'd probably sensed something was wrong. What chilled me the most wasn't the performance, it was how rehearsed it felt, like they'd been waiting for this moment. My disappearance had simply cleared the way. Then I saw it. On the wall above the fireplace was the large family portrait we'd taken 5 years ago at Dad's last birthday. We'd all been there, all 5 of us. But now my face had been cut out, not blurred, not faded, cut out, clean, precise, replaced with a background patch of trees and patio bricks. Even in death, they couldn't let me exist. I stepped back, my chest burning. I'd come here to see with my own eyes, to confirm the depth of their betrayal. But this was deeper than I imagined. They hadn't just buried me, they'd deleted me, every sacrifice I'd made, every sleepless night, every building I'd helped design, every contract I renegotiated when the company was circling bankruptcy, all of it, rewritten, retold, reassigned, and I was the ghost. I clenched my fists and leaned against the tree trunk, steadying my breath. "Nova was always too emotional," I imagined Isolde saying. "She wasn't built for leadership." Or Vera, sipping her second glass of champagne. "We tried to help her, but she kept resisting. You know how some people are, they can't get out of their own way." That was the narrative they were spinning now, the tragedy of a troubled youngest sister, a cautionary tale wrapped in white roses and well-timed eulogies. I wasn't angry anymore. I was past that. What I felt was precise, focused, cold. They wanted me gone. They wanted me invisible. But I would show them the power of a ghost. I backed away from the window and moved along the side of the house, keeping low, my footsteps light on the stone path. I slipped into the gardener's shed, still unlocked, and waited. I needed darkness. I needed time. The house was crawling with people. I would return later, when the guests were gone and the show was over. And hours passed. The music faded. Car engines rumbled, then dwindled to silence. One by one, the porch lights clicked off. By midnight, the house was still. I moved through the side entrance, the code on the old security panel still the same. Dad's birthday. They hadn't even bothered to change it. Inside, the air smelled like leftover food and expensive perfume. I walked through the dining room slowly, my eyes scanning every surface. Empty glasses. A crumpled napkin with a lipstick smear. A printed program for the Celebration of Life service, complete with a eulogy Isolde had written herself. I picked it up and read the first line. Nova was a dreamer. I almost laughed. In the corner, near the fireplace, the portrait remained, my face still absent. I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered, "They buried the wrong sister." The house was mine again, even if only for a few minutes. I moved silently through the rooms, noting the small changes Isolde had made. New art, different throws, plants where Dad's old records used to sit. She hadn't preserved the home, she'd branded it. But that would change. From that night on, every smile they wore would be recorded and turned against them. I began with silence, slipping through their rooms like a shadow, gathering proof of every lie. After the funeral party faded into whispers and sleep, I waited just long enough to be sure. Around 2:30 a.m., the lights in the upstairs bedrooms had finally gone dark, one by one. The last to flicker off was Isolde's, naturally. She always needed to be the last one seen, even in her own home. I was already inside by then. The side entrance through the mudroom still hadn't been recoded. It was the same keypad I designed when we renovated the estate, a detail Isolde had probably forgotten. Or maybe she simply didn't consider I'd ever come back. This was still my home, even if they pretended I never lived here. The air inside was heavy with perfume and burnt wax. Trays of half-eaten hors d'oeuvres sat untouched on the dining table. Glasses with lipstick-stained rims littered the coffee table. Someone had left their heels on the staircase landing. I moved quietly, but not cautiously. I knew every floorboard, every hinge that creaked, every vent that echoed voices from room to room. I designed half of it, after all. I started in Dad's study. The lamp on his old desk still gave off that faint smell of warm paper. It was where I'd learned to draft my first blueprint, where he let me stay up late tracing city maps, pretending I was a real architect before I'd even finished high school. The room had changed. Isolde had replaced most of the decor, but she hadn't touched the filing cabinets. Third drawer down on the left, his private files. Inside, invoices, old contracts, copies of donation receipts. My name was on dozens of them, even one where I'd personally transferred funds to cover emergency payroll the year the market crashed. No one had known but him. I took photos of everything with my burner phone. Next, the safe. It was newer, Isolde's edition, but she'd written the code in her planner once. I remembered the number because it was the anniversary of one of her award ceremonies. Typical. Inside the safe, a folder marked Succession Planning. The contents? Legal documents, most recently updated just a year before Dad passed. There was my name, listed first, co-signatory on multiple trusts, a breakdown of ownership in the company. None of that was in the paperwork Isolde had waved around at dinner. I scanned, photographed, then carefully placed everything back in place. Nothing disturbed. No trace. As I moved back into the hallway, I passed the guest bathroom and heard muffled voices coming from the kitchen. I paused. 2 people, laughing, drunk. I crept closer, staying low by the staircase. She would have dragged us down forever, Vera said, her tone slurred but gleeful. Thank God Isolde had the guts to make it happen. Oh, come on, the man replied. I didn't recognize him. You really believe she's dead? Vera let out a small chuckle. Darling, please, no one survives that. I recorded the whole thing. In the living room, I found the financial ledger they used for board meetings. It had been hastily tucked under a pile of mail. I opened it and flipped through pages. Several entries were backdated, fund transfers labeled as emergency restructuring. I recognized the name of the shell company, one Isolde had set up years ago when she was trying to hide a luxury condo purchase. She wasn't just rewriting family history, she was laundering it. Keep talking, I whispered silently. In the center of the living room, the champagne cart still stood. 3 bottles half empty, scattered napkins. Someone had written Nova's Legacy on a cocktail menu and crossed it out, replacing it with Fresh Start. I took a photo of that too. At the far end of the room, I saw Dad's old pen, the Mont Blanc he'd used for every major signature of his life. It had been missing since the reading of the will. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. They thought silence meant weakness, but silence is a ledger, and I was writing their debt. I made my way back out, through the back gate that led to the side alley, careful not to disturb the security cameras, which were still pointed too high thanks to a poor installation job I'd noted during a previous visit. The last thing I needed was a digital trail. A block away, I changed out of the dark hoodie and shoes I wore into more neutral clothes I'd stashed earlier. I called a rideshare under a fake name and had them drop me a few blocks from Louis' cafe. When I arrived, the street was quiet. The neon sign flickered like it always had, casting a dim glow on the sidewalk. I knocked once. Firm, intentional. Louis opened the side door, eyes wide. You okay? He asked. I nodded. I need the back office, just for a bit. He stepped aside without a word. I spread out the photos, audio clips, and documents across the table. It looked like chaos, but I saw patterns. I saw the cracks in their foundation. I saw proof. Louis brought me a cup of coffee. No words, just support. I looked at the wall clock. Nearly 5 a.m. When the time comes, I said quietly, their own words will bury them. I uploaded everything to a secured cloud drive, backups in 3 places, encrypted folders labeled innocuously, a copy on a flash drive hidden in a place no one would ever look, behind Dad's old drafting board in a storage unit registered under a company name they never knew existed. This wasn't revenge, it was insurance. They buried me once. I wouldn't give them a second chance. And that time was closer than they could imagine. It began with a single meeting. The day I walked back into the room, they were certain I'd never enter again. The Miami sky was still wrapped in a layer of early morning haze when I stepped onto the sidewalk outside the law firm's downtown office. The city was just starting to stir. Traffic whispered down the streets, the hiss of bus brakes and the hum of distant voices marking the slow start of another day. People moved with purpose, coffee cups in hand, phones pressed to ears, their lives pressing forward as if nothing had shifted in the world. But for me, everything had. In that moment, it felt like time had stretched, holding its breath just long enough for me to take one last look at the city that had swallowed me whole, and now was about to witness my return. I adjusted the sleeves of the slate-gray blazer I'd borrowed from Lewis's office closet. It didn't quite feel like me, too stiff, too corporate, but it looked the part. And that's what mattered. I needed to look like someone who belonged at the head of the table, not a woman clawing her way back from beneath the dirt they'd tried to bury her under. They wrote my absence into paperwork, signed away my legacy with ink and cold smiles. Today, I came back with something stronger. The truth. The elevator was slow and silent, the kind of hush that magnified everything. I could hear the elevator motor humming, the soft shuffle of my shoes, the slow, steady beat of my own heart. 15th floor. The doors opened with a chime. At the reception desk, a woman I didn't recognize glanced up and offered a polite smile, until I gave her my name. "Nova?" she said, straightening halfway out of her seat, color draining from her face. "But they said—" I didn't stop to correct her. I just kept walking, down the long hallway lined with black and white art prints and glass doors, toward the main conference room. My steps were measured. I didn't rush, didn't hesitate. The doors to the conference room were closed. I didn't knock. I opened them. The conversation died mid-sentence. At the head of the table sat Isolde, dressed in tailored navy, her posture as impeccable as ever. She'd been mid-laugh, her mouth frozen in a shape that no longer fit the moment. Vera sat beside her, thumbing a Mont Blanc pen between manicured fingers. Around them were 3 lawyers, one older man I vaguely remembered as Kevin, and 2 associates with open laptops and guarded eyes. Every face in the room turned toward me. Shock. Confusion. Dread. Isolde's voice faltered. This isn't possible." I stepped fully into the room, letting the door close behind me. "You should know by now," I said. "I don't sink." A beat of silence. A breath. I crossed the room and stopped at the far end of the table, opposite Isolde. I didn't sit. Instead, I placed a single leather folder on the polished surface. No one moved. Kevin leaned back slightly, his hands tented as he tried to mask the sudden shift in the room's center of gravity. "I believe you were about to finalize control of the estate," I said. My voice was calm, even. "Wouldn't want to interrupt." Isolde blinked, her perfect mask already beginning to crack. "This meeting isn't open to people who are alive?" I said, cutting her off. "Yes, I can see how that might be inconvenient." Vera stared at me like she was seeing an apparition. Her lipstick, normally flawless, had smudged slightly at the corner. A small detail, but revealing. I reached into the folder and pulled out a document. The pages were thick, cream-colored, marked with familiar signatures and an embossed seal. "This is the original will," I said, sliding it across the table toward Kevin. "With my father's signature, his seal, notarized, filed, never revoked." Twist S17 had officially been played. The room froze. Kevin glanced at the document, eyes narrowing as he scanned the first page. One of the associates pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, probably verifying case numbers and notary records. Murmured phrases passed quietly between the lawyers. Isolde didn't speak. I watched her face, calculating. She was trying to find a way out. to rewrite the narrative before it landed. She'd always been good at that. But this time, the script had been stolen from her hands. "This doesn't prove anything," she said finally, her voice strained. "Anyone could forge—" "You're right," I interrupted smoothly. "Which is why I brought something else." I placed a small black flash drive onto the table. It looked innocuous, but everyone in the room stared at it like it might detonate. "May I?" I asked, already moving toward the wall-mounted screen. No one answered. They didn't have to. I plugged in the drive. The first audio clip began immediately. Isolde's voice, crisp and unmistakable. "Once she's gone, the empire is ours." Gasps. A ripple of tension. Then Vera's voice, faintly slurred from wine, murmuring, "Poor Nova. But this is for the best." Finally, a conversation between Vera and one of the attorneys. Candid, careless, arrogant. Discussing how the false documents had been rushed, how Isolde had promised a cut of the shares if everything went through. Twist S18 had landed. Hard. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Their silence was louder than their denial had ever been. When the clip ended, the screen went dark. I removed the drive, pocketed it, and turned back to the table. "You can question my presence," I said quietly. "You can question my intentions, but you can no longer question the truth. It's documented, it's preserved, and it's legally binding." Kevin cleared his throat. "We'll need a recess." "Take your time," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Isolde shoved back her chair suddenly. It scraped loudly against the floor. "You think this ends with documents?" she snapped. "You have no idea what you've started." I turned to her. "No," I said, "but I know what you ended. Because tomorrow, the empire they stole, built on forged papers, manipulated trust, and silence, would begin to collapse under the weight of truth. And this time, it would be documented." The next morning, the boardroom was no longer theirs. It was mine. I stood near the head of the long table where Isolde had once claimed her seat with effortless arrogance. That morning, her nameplate was gone, her laptop removed, and the chair she used to lean back in as if she ran the city sat empty. There was no need to announce the shift. Everyone in that room knew. Across from me, the senior partners of the firm who'd once signed off on Isolde's forged documents shuffled through the judge's written order. They avoided my gaze. Good. They should have. The court's decision had come swiftly. It hadn't needed much deliberation. The will I'd presented was airtight, stamped, notarized, registered. My father's seal still intact, and the recordings, well, those didn't leave room for interpretation. The judge had glanced over the forged version with all the interest one gives to a discarded napkin before declaring it void. "They thought signatures could bury me," I'd said in my closing statement. "Today, signatures brought me back." Now here I was, back, the estate, the company, the name, all restored, not handed to me, not gifted, taken back. Twist S19 had landed, and no one could unring that bell. As I walked out of the boardroom, I passed Kevin, the firm's senior counsel, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 24 hours. He opened his mouth to say something, probably an apology, but I gave him nothing. Let silence speak for me, as it always had. From downtown, I drove straight to Coral Gables. The closer I got, the quieter everything felt. No more nerves, just stillness. My thoughts had settled into something clear, steady. I wasn't here for gloating. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to reclaim what never should have been stolen. When I pulled up to the estate, a black SUV sat in the driveway, unfamiliar plates, a moving service. Professional, fast, efficient, perfect. Inside, Isolde and Vera were packing, or rather, watching others do it for them. Vera was seated on the stairs, her phone clutched tightly in one hand, muttering to someone on speaker about unjust rulings and legal retaliation. Her lipstick was smudged again, but this time she wasn't hiding it. Her words were sharp, but her tone betrayed the panic behind them. Isolde was in the sunroom, Dad's sunroom, snapping orders at two movers who barely acknowledged her. I said wrap the marble sculpture properly, not dump it in a box like cheap tchotchkes, she snapped. That's not yours, I said from the doorway. She froze, then turned slowly. Oh, look. The resurrection. I hope your boxes are labeled. I'd hate for you to forget which ones are filled with things you never earned. Twist S20 was in motion now. I'll sue, she said, eyes narrowing. Defamation, emotional trauma. You'll wish. I already did, I cut in. But now I'm awake, and I'm home. Her face twitched. She opened her mouth again, but nothing useful came out. The legal officers accompanying me stepped forward. One handed her a printed notice outlining the transition of ownership and the immediate transfer of property. She took it like it burned her fingers. They had 24 hours to vacate. I gave them 2. As they gathered what they could, designer bags, framed awards, silk scarves they hadn't worn in years, neighbors began to take notice. Some peeked from behind hedges. Others stood with arms crossed on driveways. No one waved. That's the woman who betrayed her own sister, someone muttered. Look at her now. Nothing left. Vera turned her face away, clutching her sunglasses like they were armor. Isolde straightened her shoulders, refusing to look back as she stepped into the SUV. But the twitch at her temple betrayed her. The doors shut. The car rolled down the drive. And just like that, the empire they stole crumbled behind them. The mansion that had once been filled with champagne laughter and orchestrated elegance now echoed with quiet, not emptiness, just truth. I walked through the foyer slowly, running my fingers along the banister I'd refinished myself one summer when we couldn't afford contractors. Upstairs, I passed rooms where I used to draft blueprints while the rest of the family vacationed in Italy. In the sitting room, I stopped. The portrait, our family photo, still hung above the fireplace, my face still cut out. I stood there for a long moment, then reached into my bag and pulled out the original, uncut, untouched. I had kept it safe all these years, tucked between journals, waiting. I removed the damaged frame, set it aside, and replaced it with the real one. No ceremony, just a quiet, deliberate correction. I looked up at it and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Not joy, not vengeance, just resolution. I didn't need to shout, I whispered. Their downfall spoke louder than I ever could. The last room I visited was Dad's study. His scent lingered faintly, old paper, cedar, and something warm like black coffee. I placed the court documents on his desk, a quiet offering. I sat in his chair, facing the window that looked out over the garden. The sun was lower now, stretching long shadows across the lawn. In my hands, I held the keys, the estate, the company, the legacy, and a single question. I had won the battle, but victory never heals the scars. And as they vanished into obscurity, I faced the one question they left behind. What would I do with the empire I nearly died for? I knew the answer came not from revenge, but from rebuilding, and from honoring the one man who never let me drown. The quiet in my father's study lingered like a benediction. Morning light filtered in through the plantation shutters, casting golden stripes across the mahogany desk. The chair still creaked the way it did when I was 10, swinging my legs while he read contracts aloud just so I could get used to the rhythm of real decisions, he'd say. I placed my hand on the desk's edge, grounding myself in the only legacy that mattered, one of principle, not possessions. 3 months had passed since the court ruling. Not much had made the papers beyond the headline, "Missing heir returns, fraud exposed." The rest of the world moved on quickly, but the ripple beneath the surface was where the truth remained. That morning, I was alone again, but for the right reasons this time. No more shadows, no more second-guessing the silence. It was the first quiet that didn't ache. And while I had no intention of chasing them down, the world hadn't been as forgiving to Isolde and Vera as they'd hoped. Twist S21 had played itself out naturally. Isolde was working at a small accounting office north of the city, one of those storefront firms sandwiched between a laundromat and a payday loan outlet. A friend of a friend had emailed me a photo, her hair tied up, her blazer too tight in the shoulders, hunched over a copier, No headlines, no fireworks, just the humbling dullness of the ordinary. Vera fared similarly. She'd taken over a second-hand charity shop in Little Haiti, not out of generosity, but necessity. Word had spread fast. Clients disappeared. So did her contacts. A woman who once curated guest lists for galas now managed hangars and handled return disputes with people who didn't know who she used to be and didn't care. No judge sentenced them. Life did. And it did so with the elegance they never extended to others. I didn't visit. I didn't call. I didn't need to. While they were fading, I was building. Twist S22 wasn't revenge, it was legacy. I reopened my father's firm under a new name, Lumen Foundation, drawn from the Latin for light. The company didn't just design buildings now. We built futures. I started a scholarship in his name, targeting underrepresented students in architecture and urban planning, internships, housing stipends, mentorship. Not a single favor exchanged for press coverage, just work, resources, and respect. The first group of scholars started orientation last week. I'd sat quietly in the back of the room, watching them jot notes, raise hands, challenge each other. One girl reminded me of myself, bent over her notebook, tongue pressed to her lip in concentration, trying to solve a structural issue in one of the mock-ups. I'd walked past her on my way out. "You have an eye for form," I told her. She looked up, surprised. "I just try to make it functional." "That's exactly where good design begins," I said. She smiled, and it stayed with me for days. Twist S23 came quietly, wrapped in the kind of moment no headline ever catches. Tonight was the launch gala for the scholarship. A modest venue overlooking the bay, nothing flashy. Just soft lighting, rented chairs, and the kind of people who spoke less with status and more with purpose. Hector came, wearing a button-up shirt that didn't quite fit, and shoes that looked like they'd seen the inside of more docks than dining rooms. Louis stood beside him, hands in his pockets, refusing to look impressed, though I knew he was. When it was time for the speech, I stepped onto the stage. No script, no spotlight, just me. I looked out into the audience and let the pause speak first. Then I said, "Family isn't blood. Family are the hands that pull you back when you're drowning." A few people nodded. A quiet moment of agreement. I continued. "And sometimes, you have to let go of the ones who tried to sink you, not out of hatred, but because you can't grow where you're not seen." Applause was soft, but it wasn't forced. When I stepped off the stage, Hector squeezed my shoulder once and said, "You didn't just survive, mija. You became." Louis handed me a glass of iced tea and clinked it lightly against mine. "Your father would have been proud." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because anything more would have cracked the calm I'd built around me. Afterward, I stepped outside alone. The night had cooled, and the breeze coming off the bay smelled like salt and jasmine. I walked toward the edge of the patio, the heels of my shoes softly echoing across the stone. I looked up. The sky was wide and quiet, the stars scattered like tiny protests against the dark. Stars are born from collapse. I was the star they tried to bury in the sea, but I rose brighter than they ever imagined. I am Nova, the sister they tried to erase, but the star they could never drown. Sometimes the people closest to us aren't family. They're the ones who teach us why we must choose ourselves. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about survival, dignity, and the quiet power of reclaiming your voice when the world tries to silence you. Have you ever felt erased by the people who were supposed to love you? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more true-to-life revenge stories coming, stories that might just reflect your own.